The morning I found my wedding ring missing, I knew exactly who had taken it. My daughter Rachel stood in my kitchen with her arms folded and didn't even pretend to feel ashamed. "I sold it," she said. "We needed the cash more than you needed another reminder of a man who's been dead for 3 years." By noon, I was standing inside Klein Family Jewelers, praying Robert's ring had not already been melted down. The elderly jeweler stared at it beneath his magnifying lamp, then locked the front door. Linda Arthur whispered, "Your husband warned me this might happen." He turned the ring over carefully. "Before anyone opens it, call Patricia." Robert didn't hide jewelry inside this ring. He hid a warning. "Before I tell you what my husband left behind, please take a moment to like and subscribe. And tell me honestly in the comments, could you forgive your own daughter for something like this? I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there." Sometimes, knowing someone is listening makes a painful memory a little easier to share. 6 months before my wedding ring disappeared, I still believed opening my home to Rachel would bring us closer. She called me on a rainy Tuesday evening while I was folding towels in the living room. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "Mom," she said, "I need a little help." Rachel had said those words many times throughout her life. But that night, there was something different behind them. Her divorce from Mark had become final 2 weeks earlier. She had lost the apartment because she could no longer afford the rent, and the temporary bookkeeping job she had taken was ending at the end of the month. Emily was still in school, and Rachel said she had nowhere else to go. "You never have to ask twice," I told her. I meant it. The next morning, I cleared out the room Robert had once used as a small workshop. I packed his sanding tools into labeled boxes, folded his old work aprons, and carried his unfinished wooden clock into my bedroom. Every object I moved felt like I was disturbing a part of him, but I kept reminding myself that my living family needed me. I gave Rachel the guest room and prepared her old childhood bedroom for Emily. I even bought new curtains with little yellow flowers because Emily had always loved warm colors. When they arrived, Rachel hugged me so tightly I could feel her trembling. "This is only temporary," she promised. "Just until I get back on my feet." Emily wrapped her arms around my waist and whispered, "Thank you, Grandma." For the first few weeks, everything felt almost peaceful. Rachel cooked dinner twice a week. She cleaned the kitchen without being asked and drove me to a doctor's appointment when my car was being serviced. Emily did her homework at the dining table while I read nearby. On Friday nights, the three of us watched old movies and shared a bowl of popcorn. For the first time since Robert died, the house no longer seemed painfully quiet. I began to imagine that their moving in might be a blessing disguised as a crisis. Then, small things started changing. Rachel began with the living room. One afternoon, I came home from the grocery store and found 3 cardboard boxes beside the front door. Inside were Robert's books, 2 framed photographs, and the hand-carved wooden bowl he had made for our 30th anniversary. "What are these doing here?" I asked. Rachel was standing on a chair, removing curtains from the windows. "I'm decluttering," she said. "This place is too crowded." I lifted the wooden bowl carefully. Robert had carved tiny leaves around its edge. I could still remember him sitting at his workbench, pretending I could not see the sawdust in his hair. "These aren't clutter." Rachel sighed as though I were being unreasonable. "Mom, no one is asking you to forget Dad, but you don't have to turn the whole house into a museum." I put everything back where it belonged. That evening, Rachel barely spoke to me. Soon, she began commenting on other things. The wallpaper was outdated. The sofa was too old. The kitchen needed new cabinets. The backyard was too much work for a woman my age. At first, I told myself she was only trying to help. Rachel had always been restless. Even as a child, she rearranged her bedroom whenever she felt unhappy. Changing her surroundings gave her the illusion that she was changing her life. But this time, she was rearranging mine. Jason Reed began visiting about a month after Rachel moved in. The first time I met him, he arrived carrying a bouquet of white lilies and a bottle of expensive-looking wine. "Mrs. Miller," he said, smiling warmly, "Rachel has told me so much about you." He was handsome in a polished way, with perfectly trimmed hair, a dark wool coat, and the confident posture of a man who expected people to listen when he spoke. "Call me Linda," I said. He complimented my home. He admired Robert's woodwork and spent nearly 10 minutes examining the dining table Robert had built by hand. "This is quality," Jason said. "You don't see craftsmanship like this anymore." That compliment softened me. During his first few visits, Jason was helpful. He fixed a loose cabinet hinge, replaced a burned-out porch light, and carried several heavy bags of soil into the backyard. He asked Emily about school and listened patiently while she described a science project. I understood why Rachel liked him. He made people feel noticed, but after a while, his questions became too personal. One evening over dinner, Jason glanced around the dining room and asked, "Is the mortgage paid off?" Rachel looked embarrassed. "Jason," what he said lightly, "I work in real estate. I notice these things." I answered because I did not want to seem rude. "Yes. Robert and I paid it off several years ago. That must be a wonderful feeling." "It is." A week later, he asked whether I had updated my will after Robert's death. Another time, he wanted to know whether Robert had owned property outside Columbus. I gave him vague answers, but I noticed how carefully he listened. Jason also began suggesting that I should sell the house. "You could get a very good price in this neighborhood," he told me. "Then you could move into a beautiful retirement community where someone else handles the maintenance." "I am not looking for someone else to handle my life." He laughed as though I had made a joke. Rachel did not. Later that night, she followed me into the kitchen. "You don't have to get defensive every time Jason offers advice. I didn't ask for his advice. He's only thinking about your future. My future is not his responsibility." Rachel's mouth tightened. "Maybe it should be someone's responsibility. You're here alone in a house that's too big, holding on to things you don't need." I stared at her. "You and Emily are living here. That's not the point." I wanted to ask what the point was, but Emily walked into the room and Rachel immediately changed the subject. After that conversation, I began noticing papers out of place. A bank statement I had left unopened on the hall table was already torn open when I picked it up. Rachel claimed she thought it belonged to her. My property tax folder disappeared from the desk and reappeared 2 days later in a kitchen drawer. The key to my filing cabinet was moved from the small ceramic dish where I always kept it. Each incident was minor enough to explain away. Together, they formed a pattern I did not want to see. One afternoon, I walked into Robert's old workshop and found Rachel standing beside the filing cabinet with her phone in her hand. A folder lay open on the table. "What are you doing?" I asked. She jumped. "Nothing." I looked down. The folder contained copies of our homeowner's insurance tax assessments and the deed to the house. "You were photographing my papers. I was organizing them." "With your camera?" Rachel rolled her eyes. "You lose things, Mom. I'm making digital copies in case something happens." "I have never asked you to manage my documents. You shouldn't have to ask. I'm your daughter." The words sounded loving, but her tone was sharp. I took the folder from her and locked the cabinet. That evening, Emily came into my room while I was reading. "Grandma," she said quietly, "are you mad at Mom? I'm concerned." She looked toward the hallway before lowering her voice. "Jason keeps asking her if she found something." My heart tightened. Found what I don't know. Papers, I think. Before I could ask more, Rachel called Emily from downstairs. The girl hurried away. The next morning, I checked the printer history on the computer in Robert's workshop. Rachel had printed copies of my house deed, 2 years of property tax records, and an old county map showing a parcel of land registered under Robert Miller's name. I stared at that map for a long time. Robert had told me that land was sold decades earlier. Yet someone in my house was searching for it as though it still belonged to me. And for the first time, I wondered whether Rachel's financial crisis was the real reason she had come home. By the time I returned to Klein Family Jewelers the following morning, I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Rachel standing in my kitchen with that empty expression on her face as she admitted she had sold my wedding ring. I kept asking myself the same impossible question. Where had I gone wrong? Had I loved her too much or not enough? Arthur Klein was already waiting for me when I pushed open the heavy oak door. The little bell above it chimed softly. Unlike the previous afternoon, the display lights were dimmed and the shop was unusually quiet. The young sales associate who had greeted customers the day before was nowhere to be seen. Arthur looked up from the workbench. "You came." "I don't think I had any other choice." He nodded gently. "No." He motioned toward a chair beside his workbench. "Please sit down." The workshop behind the showroom smelled exactly as it had years ago when Robert used to visit Arthur to discuss custom designs. It carried the familiar scent of polishing compound, warm metal cedar drawers, and old leather. For a moment, I could almost imagine Robert standing beside me, smiling that quiet smile of his, while the two old craftsmen argued over tiny details no one else would ever notice. Instead, I sat alone. Arthur carefully opened a velvet pouch and placed my wedding ring on the black mat between us. Even after everything that had happened, my breath caught. 42 years. That little circle of gold had witnessed every chapter of my marriage. It had been on my finger when Rachel was born. It had rested against Robert's hand while we prayed in hospital waiting rooms. It had caught the sunlight during family vacations, graduations, anniversaries, funerals, and ordinary mornings over coffee. And yesterday, my own daughter had traded it for money. Arthur didn't touch the ring immediately. Instead, he folded his hands. "Linda, I owe you an explanation." I looked at him. When Rachel walked into this store yesterday, I recognized the ring before she even placed it on the counter. "You knew? I helped Robert build it." Those words settled over the room like dust. I thought Robert designed it himself. "He did, mostly." Arthur smiled sadly. "He came to me with sketches. I've never seen another wedding ring quite like it." He reached into a drawer and removed a jeweler's loop. "This isn't just a wedding band." "I know that now." "No," he replied quietly. "I don't think you do." He slid the loop across the table but didn't ask me to use it. Instead, he pointed to the inside edge of the band. "Do you see that faint seam?" I leaned closer. At first, I saw nothing. Then, under the bright workshop lamp, I noticed an almost invisible line circling the inside of the ring. My heart skipped. "I've worn this ring for over 40 years. "I know. And I never noticed." "That was the idea." Arthur carefully rotated the ring. "Robert spent months perfecting this mechanism." My throat tightened. Why would he hide something inside a wedding ring? Arthur looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Because he believed no one would ever think to look there. Before I could ask another question, the front door opened. Both of us turned. Rachel hurried inside. She looked exhausted. Her hair was tied back carelessly and dark circles surrounded her eyes. The moment she saw me, she stopped. "So, you're really doing this?" Her voice echoed through the empty showroom. I stood. "You sold my wedding ring." "I told you why." "You stole it." Rachel crossed her arms. "It was just jewelry." The words struck me harder than I expected. "It was never just jewelry." She laughed bitterly. "It wasn't feeding anybody. It wasn't yours. We needed money." I stared at her. "We For a fraction of a second, something flashed across her face. Regret. Fear. Then it disappeared. You know exactly what I mean. No, I don't. She took 2 steps toward me. You have a paid-off house. You have savings. You have investments. You have things you'll never use. And you couldn't help your own daughter. I have helped you. For years. I opened my home to you. I've paid bills. I've watched Emily. I've never asked for a penny. Rachel shook her head violently. You always make me feel like charity. No, I make you feel responsible. Arthur quietly stepped between us. Rachel. She turned. I'm afraid I can't release the ring. You don't own it. Arthur remained calm. I never completed the purchase. What? I told you yesterday I needed to verify ownership. You said that was just paperwork. It wasn't. Rachel looked genuinely confused. You mean? Arthur nodded. I never paid for the ring. Silence. Rachel blinked. Jason said. She stopped herself too late. My stomach tightened. Jason? Rachel immediately looked away. Arthur spoke before I could. The gentleman waiting outside yesterday. Rachel's face paled. You saw him. I notice more than people realize. Arthur walked to a computer monitor and pressed a button. Security footage appeared. The camera above the front entrance showed Rachel entering the store. Seconds later, Jason stepped into view outside the window. He never came inside. Instead, he paced the sidewalk while staring through the glass. Every few moments, he looked down at his phone. Rachel's own phone lit up repeatedly while she stood at the counter. Arthur froze the video. You received 12 text messages in less than 10 minutes. Rachel swallowed. You weren't making this decision alone. I was. No, Arthur's voice remained gentle. You kept looking toward the window before answering every question I asked. Rachel stared at the floor. I looked at my daughter. Were you afraid of him? Her answer came instantly. No. Too quickly. Too sharply. The kind of answer people give when they're trying to convince themselves. Arthur closed the video. I offered to hold the ring overnight because I recognized Robert's craftsmanship. Rachel looked up. You knew there was something inside. Arthur didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, I knew Robert trusted me. Rachel's breathing became uneven. What is inside it? Arthur looked at me instead of her. That information belongs to Linda. Rachel's frustration exploded. This is ridiculous. It's just a ring. Arthur's eyes softened. No. It has never been just a ring. Rachel looked at me desperately. Mom! For the first time since this nightmare began, her voice sounded less angry than frightened. We need the money. Again, we, not I, not Emily, we. I stepped closer. Tell me the truth. She didn't answer. Who is we? Rachel rubbed her forehead. You wouldn't understand. Try me. It's complicated. Make it simple. She looked toward the window. Jason wasn't there anymore, but somehow it felt as though he still was. Finally, Rachel whispered, Jason has a deal. What kind of deal? A real estate investment. How much money? She hesitated. A lot. How much? Her eyes filled with tears. More than we have. My heart sank. You promised him the money from my ring. She nodded almost imperceptibly. It was supposed to help us. Us, she whispered. He said once the investment closed, everything would change. I suddenly understood something terrifying. Rachel hadn't sold my wedding ring because $1,800 would solve her problems. She had sold it because someone had convinced her that my memories were worth sacrificing for his future. Arthur carefully placed the ring back into its velvet pouch. Then he looked at me. "Patricia Lawson should be here within the hour." I nodded. "What happens then?" Arthur rested one hand gently on the workbench. "Then we find out why Robert believed this day would eventually come." And for the first time since Robert died, I realized my husband hadn't simply left me a wedding ring. He had left me instructions for surviving the people I loved most. Patricia Lawson arrived 40 minutes later, carrying a dark brown leather briefcase that looked older than some of the buildings downtown. She walked into Klein Family Jewelers with the calm confidence of someone who had spent decades settling arguments that could destroy families. At 61, Patricia had silver streaks running through her dark hair, sharp blue eyes behind thin reading glasses, and a habit of speaking only after she had considered every possible consequence of her words. She had been Robert's attorney for nearly 25 years. She had also become one of our closest friends. When she saw me, she didn't ask how I was. She simply wrapped her arms around me. "I'm sorry, Linda." "So am I." She held my shoulders for a moment before looking toward Arthur. "Is it still sealed?" Arthur nodded. "No one has touched the mechanism." Patricia released a slow breath. "Good." Rachel was still standing near the front window's arms folded tightly across her chest. She looked from Arthur to Patricia and then to me. "What is everybody acting so serious about?" No one answered immediately. Patricia placed her briefcase on Arthur's workbench and entered a 6-digit combination. Inside were several folders, a small notarized envelope, and a document bound with a red ribbon. She lifted the envelope first. "This," she said quietly, "was given to me by Robert 11 months before he passed away." I felt my stomach tighten. He never told me. He asked me not to. The words hurt more than I expected. For 42 years, my husband never kept secrets from me. Patricia looked at me with genuine sympathy. He struggled with this decision. He came to my office 3 separate times before he finally signed these documents. I stared at the envelope bearing Robert's unmistakable handwriting. My name was written across the front. Linda. Not Mrs. Miller, not my wife, just Linda. Exactly the way he always addressed birthday cards and anniversary letters. "He loved you too much to frighten you," Patricia continued softly. "He hoped these papers would never be needed." Rachel let out a frustrated sigh. "This is unbelievable. Mom loses one ring and suddenly everyone's acting like it's a federal investigation." Patricia turned toward her. "It isn't about the ring." "Then what is it about?" "It is about why your father believed someone might one day try to take it." The room became perfectly still. Rachel actually laughed. "My father thought I'd steal from my own mother." "No," Patricia answered immediately. "Your father feared that one day you might become desperate enough to trust the wrong person." Rachel's face hardened. "That's insulting." Patricia didn't argue. Instead, she untied the red ribbon around the document. Inside was a handwritten statement signed by Robert and witnessed by 2 people. She adjusted her glasses and began reading. "If this statement is ever opened, it means the safeguards I created have become necessary. Linda, if you are hearing these words, I am deeply sorry. I prayed you would never have to." My chest tightened. I could almost hear Robert speaking. "This is not because I stopped trusting you. It is because I knew you would always choose love over caution." A tear rolled down my cheek before I even realized I was crying. That was Robert. He knew me better than anyone. If Rachel had simply asked for the ring, I probably would have given it to her. Not because it was unimportant, but because she was my daughter. Patricia continued. Rachel is not a bad person. Rachel looked surprised. She has a generous heart, but throughout her life, she has believed promises more easily than facts. I remembered every failed business idea, every impulsive decision, every man who promised Rachel a brighter future, every disappointment that followed. If someone ever convinces Rachel that protecting the family requires hurting Linda, she will convince herself she has no other choice. Rachel looked away. I never said that, she whispered. Patricia continued reading. Please remember this carefully. Desperation changes people. Shame changes them even faster. Arthur lowered his eyes respectfully. The workshop had become so quiet that I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Robert's letter continued. Linda, if this day has arrived, do not blame yourself. Do not let guilt decide what happens next. I closed my eyes. Those words struck deeper than anything else, because guilt had guided almost every important decision I'd made as Rachel's mother. Every debt I'd quietly paid, every mistake I'd covered, every excuse I'd accepted. Patricia folded the letter carefully. There is more. She removed another document. This is a notarized instruction addressed jointly to Arthur Klein and myself. Arthur stepped close. I've kept my copy for 3 years. Patricia read aloud. The hidden compartment inside Linda's wedding ring may only be opened if all 3 conditions are satisfied. She looked up. The first condition, Linda Miller must be physically present. She checked the list. The second, Arthur Klein must confirm the ring has not been altered or damaged. Arthur nodded. It hasn't. Patricia continued. The third, Patricia Lawson must witness the opening and certify Linda's identity. Rachel frowned. This is ridiculous. Patricia ignored the interruption. There is also one final instruction. She paused before reading. No one else is to know what is inside until the compartment has been opened correctly. Rachel took a step forward. I have a right to know. Patricia looked directly at her. No, you don't. Your father wrote these instructions. Rachel's jaw tightened. He wouldn't hide something from his own daughter. Patricia's expression softened. He didn't hide it from you. He protected it from everyone. Arthur disappeared into the back room and returned carrying a small velvet tray covered with specialized jeweler's tools. Some looked like tiny screwdrivers. Others resembled surgical instruments. He carefully placed the wedding ring beneath a bright magnifying lamp. I've only performed this procedure once. I looked at him. The day Robert tested the mechanism, he smiled faintly. He insisted on practicing it twice. That's Robert, Arthur chuckled sadly. He said if he couldn't open it himself, he had no business asking someone else to. Even Rachel couldn't suppress a small smile. For just a moment, we all remembered the same man. Arthur slipped on a pair of white cotton gloves. He examined the ring from every angle. Then he selected a tiny polished steel tool no longer than a toothpick. The mechanism is hidden beneath the inside edge. He inserted the tool into a groove so small I couldn't even see it. Nothing happened. Then he rotated the ring exactly 1/4 turn. A barely audible click echoed across the workshop. Rachel gasped. I leaned closer. A paper-thin seam slowly appeared around part of the inner band. Arthur stopped immediately. If I force it? He shook his head. Everything inside could be damaged. He adjusted the angle under the lamp. Another careful movement. Another faint click. Then something extraordinary happened. A section of the ring, no wider than my little fingernail, gently lifted upward. I covered my mouth. 42 years. 42 years wearing that ring. And I had never known. Arthur carefully lifted the tiny compartment with a pair of delicate tweezers. Inside lay two objects. The first was a tightly rolled strip of waterproof microfilm, smaller than a matchstick. The second was an old brass key. Tiny. Worn smooth with age. The number 317 had been engraved into one side. Arthur placed both items onto the velvet tray. No one spoke. I picked up the key. It felt surprisingly heavy for something so small. "What does it open?" Patricia slowly closed Robert's letter. "I believe I know." "You do?" She nodded. "About 15 years ago, Robert asked me to help him rent a private document vault." I frowned. "A safety deposit box?" "No. Much more secure. He never wanted bank employees or anyone else to have unrestricted access." I looked back at the tiny key. "So, that's where we're going?" "Yes." "And the microfilm?" Patricia gently lifted it between two fingers. "We'll need a professional archive lab. It can't simply be unrolled." "If we damage it..." She didn't finish the sentence. Rachel stared silently at the objects lying on the velvet tray. Her anger had disappeared. Now she looked frightened. "What if..." She hesitated. "What if Dad hid money?" Patricia slowly turned toward her. "If Robert wanted to hide money..." She glanced at me. "He would have chosen a simpler place." Rachel swallowed. "Then what did he hide?" Patricia carefully returned the microfilm to its protective sleeve. "I don't know. But whatever it is," she looked directly at me, "your husband believed it was important enough to trust to the one object he knew you would never willingly give away." I looked down at the ring. Only yesterday I had believed it represented the end of my marriage. Now I realized it was only the beginning of the last promise Robert had ever made to me. And somehow, I already knew that promise had nothing to do with money. I barely slept that night. The wedding ring rested inside a small velvet box on my bedside table. No longer just a symbol of my marriage, but the keeper of a secret Robert had carried for years without ever letting me see the weight of it. Several times I reached over and opened the lid. The ring looked exactly as it always had. Simple, elegant, ordinary. No one in the world would have guessed that hidden inside its narrow gold band had been a brass key and a strip of microfilm that my husband believed might one day protect me. Around 3 in the morning, I finally gave up trying to sleep and walked downstairs. The house was quiet. Emily's bedroom door was closed. Rachel's room was dark. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen table where Robert and I had spent thousands of mornings together. Only now did I notice how many memories were attached to ordinary places. The chair where he always sat. The window he liked to look through while drinking coffee. The tiny scratch on the tabletop where Rachel had accidentally dropped a pair of scissors when she was 7 years old. For years, I had believed grief slowly erased details. Instead, it seemed to preserve them. At 8 o'clock sharp, Patricia pulled into my driveway. She stepped inside carrying a thermos of coffee and her leather briefcase. "You look exhausted." "I am. I expected as much." She poured us both a cup. "Arthur is already waiting at the archive center." I frowned. "I thought we were going to the document vault first." "We will. But the microfilm comes first." She carefully removed the protective case from her briefcase. "Robert specifically wrote that the information on this film should be viewed before opening Vault 317. I stared at her. "So, Whatever's inside the vault depends on what's on the film. Exactly. 40 minutes later, we arrived at the Ohio Historical Records Restoration Laboratory, a secure facility that specialized in preserving damaged legal archives, photographs, and film. The building looked more like a university research center than a government office. Arthur was already waiting in the lobby. He greeted me with a gentle smile. "You ready?" "No." He laughed quietly. "Neither am I." A technician named Melissa escorted us into a climate-controlled room where every surface gleamed under bright white lights. She wore cotton gloves before touching the microfilm. "This is remarkably well preserved," she said. "It was sealed inside gold for decades." Melissa looked impressed. "That's certainly one way to preserve documents." She placed the tiny roll beneath a specialized scanner. The machine hummed softly. My heartbeat seemed louder than the equipment. A computer monitor flickered. One image appeared, then another, then another. None of us spoke. The first image was a copy of an official property deed. Across the top appeared a familiar name, Linda Miller, owner. My eyebrows knitted together. "This can't be right." Patricia leaned closer. "It is." The property address meant nothing to me at first. Then I recognized the township. "That's impossible." "Why? Robert sold that land." "No." Patricia answered quietly. "He didn't." I looked at her in disbelief. "He told me he sold it 23 years ago. He told you the legal dispute had been resolved. He never said the property changed hands." I stared back at the screen. The next scanned image appeared. It showed detailed survey maps, road access, property boundaries, environmental reports. Every document listed me as the legal owner. My hands began trembling. "I don't understand." Arthur looked toward Patricia. "I think it's time." She nodded. Melissa advanced to the next image. This time, it wasn't a legal document. It was a handwritten letter. Robert's handwriting filled the page. "My dearest Linda, if you're reading this, then someone has crossed a line. I hoped no one ever would." I closed my eyes for a moment. Even seeing his handwriting made my chest ache. Melissa enlarged the image so it filled the screen. Robert continued, "Please don't waste time asking why I kept this from you. One day, you may be angry with me. I understand that, but I'd rather have you angry and safe than trusting someone who wants what belongs to you." A tear rolled down my cheek. Patricia quietly handed me a tissue. Robert's letter continued. "The property your father left you was never sold. I only allowed everyone to believe it was." My breath caught. Everyone who was everyone. Melissa scrolled farther. "The land became protected through a trust years ago because someone tried to steal it after your father's death. I chose secrecy instead of conflict. I knew you would never enjoy living in courtrooms." That sounded exactly like Robert. He had always preferred solving problems quietly. Another page appeared. "Linda, if anyone pressures you to sell this land, stop. If anyone tells you you're selfish for protecting it, stop. If anyone makes you feel guilty for saying no, stop. Because the moment guilt makes your decisions, they are no longer your decisions." I covered my mouth. Those words reached deeper than anything else. Robert knew me. He knew that my greatest weakness had never been fear. It had always been guilt. Guilt for saying no. Guilt for disappointing people. Guilt for protecting myself. Melissa advanced again. This image displayed financial records, annual tax payments, trust statements, maintenance expenses. Everything had been meticulously documented for more than 20 years. Patricia pointed to one page. "See this?" I nodded. The trust has remained active the entire time. So, I've owned this land. All along. Yes. I shook my head slowly. I had absolutely no idea. There was a reason? The next image answered it. It contained copies of newspaper clippings from 20 years earlier. A headline caught my attention. Local developer sued over fraudulent land claims. Below, it appeared another. Estate dispute involves multiple forged deeds. My pulse quickened. What does this have to do with us? Patricia answered. The developer involved had previously attempted to challenge ownership of your father's land. I stared at her. So Robert moved everything into protected ownership. He wanted anyone searching public records to believe the property had quietly disappeared. Melissa displayed another document. This one was newer, much newer, dated only 8 months earlier. It was a request for public ownership research, requested by Reed Property Ventures. I frowned. What is that? Arthur looked at me carefully. It's Jason's company. Silence. The room suddenly felt colder. He searched for my property. Patricia nodded. Months before he met Rachel. I couldn't speak. Melissa continued opening the scanned images, one after another. Requests for zoning information, infrastructure studies, future highway expansion, commercial development plans. Each document increased the property's estimated value. Then came the appraisal. Estimated current market value. $480,000. I stared at the number. No. Melissa looked at me kindly. I'm afraid it's accurate. $5 million. Robert had hidden a $5 million property from me. Not because he didn't trust me, because he wanted to protect me. I felt overwhelmed, angry, confused, heartbroken, grateful. Every emotion collided at once. Patricia gently closed the laptop for a moment. Take your time. I don't know how. She squeezed my hand. You don't have to understand everything today. I looked toward Arthur. Did you know? He hesitated. I knew there was protected property, but not the value. I never asked. Robert had chosen his friends carefully, people who respected silence, people who honored promises. Melissa reopened the final scanned page. Unlike the others, it contained only a few handwritten lines. If Jason Reed is part of the reason you found this, then I was right. The room froze. Patricia looked up sharply. Arthur leaned closer. I read the sentence twice, 3 times. My hands began shaking. Robert had written Jason's name. Not someone else's. Not a description. His actual name. I looked at Patricia in disbelief. That's impossible. Robert died 3 years ago. He couldn't have known Jason. Patricia slowly nodded. You're right. So why? She stared thoughtfully at the screen. Then her eyes widened. I don't think Robert meant this, Jason. What? I think... She paused. Jason Reed wasn't the first Reed who tried to take your family's land. The room fell silent. Suddenly, the story I believed had begun with my daughter's stolen wedding ring stretched back decades long before Rachel met Jason, long before Robert became ill, perhaps even before our marriage itself. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't simply about greed. It was about a secret someone had been trying to uncover for years. For several long seconds, no one in the archive room spoke. I kept staring at the last page of Robert's handwritten message. The name Jason Reed seemed to burn into the screen. It can't be him, I whispered. He was in college when Robert died. Patricia nodded slowly. I know. Arthur folded his arms. Robert wasn't the kind of man who made impossible predictions. No, I agreed. He wasn't. Patricia leaned closer to the monitor. Let's not jump to conclusions. Melissa, the archive technician, zoomed in on the handwritten page. Only then did we notice something unusual. Robert hadn't written, "If Jason Reed is involved." He had written something slightly different. "If a Reed is part of the reason you found this." The family name, not the full name. I released a slow breath. So I read it too quickly. Patricia nodded. You read what you expected to see. She closed the file and turned toward me. Now we need to find out why Robert singled out that surname. Within an hour, we were sitting in Patricia's office, surrounded by stacks of legal files. She unlocked an old metal filing cabinet that looked as though it had been there since the 1980s. I haven't opened these files in years. She pulled out a thick folder. Across the tab were the words, Miller Family Trust. Inside were court records dating back nearly 25 years. Patricia spread them across the conference table. Your father owned nearly 60 acres outside Columbus. I nodded. I remember visiting when I was little. There was a dispute after he died. I knew that much. What you didn't know was who started it. She slid one newspaper clipping toward me. The headline read, Developer Challenges Miller Ownership. Beneath it was a photograph of a smiling businessman. The caption identified him as Harold Reed. My stomach tightened. Reed. Yes. Patricia nodded. Jason's father. I felt as though the room had shifted beneath my feet. You're certain? I checked this morning. She opened another file. Jason Reed inherited part of his father's company after Harold died. Arthur frowned. So this didn't begin with Jason? No. Patricia shook her head. It began with his father. According to the documents, Harold Reed had claimed that my father had verbally agreed to sell him the land decades earlier. The supposed agreement had never existed. When no signed contract could be produced, forged paperwork mysteriously appeared. Robert immediately challenged every document. The dispute dragged through court for years before Harold Reed abandoned the case. Robert never told me. He didn't want you carrying that burden. Patricia handed me another page. I think he was afraid history might repeat itself. I stared at the signature at the bottom. Robert had personally guaranteed every legal expense, every filing, every investigation. While I believed the land had quietly disappeared from our lives, my husband had been protecting it without ever asking me to relive the conflict. Tears filled my eyes again. He carried all of this alone. Arthur smiled sadly. That's who Robert was. For a while, none of us spoke. Then Patricia broke the silence. We need to know exactly how Jason found the property. She picked up her phone. I know someone. An hour later, we were sitting across from Michael Torres, a licensed financial investigator who specialized in elder financial exploitation. He greeted Patricia warmly. What have you brought me this time? A family mystery. Michael spent nearly 30 minutes reviewing the documents. He typed rapidly into his computer. Corporate registrations, property databases, civil court filings, business licenses. Every few minutes, another screen appeared. Finally, he leaned back. Well, none of this is good. My heart sank. What did you find? He turned the monitor toward us. This is Reed Property Ventures. The company looked impressive on paper. Professional website. Luxury office photographs. Large development projects. Then Michael clicked another window. Tax liens, outstanding lawsuits, contract disputes, default notices. There were far more red warnings than successful projects. This company is almost broke. Arthur raised an eyebrow. How broke? Michael answered bluntly. If several investors demanded repayment today, it would collapse. I stared at the screen. But Jason always talked about successful developments. Michael gave a tired smile. People in financial trouble often become very good storytellers. He continued searching. More records appeared. Several loans had been taken against properties Jason no longer owned. One project had stopped construction months earlier. Another investor accused Jason of misrepresenting property values. The pattern became impossible to ignore. "He needs cash," Patricia said quietly. Michael nodded. "He needs collateral even more." He opened another report. This caught my attention. It was a timeline. 8 months earlier, someone from Reed Property Ventures had requested ownership records connected to my father's old land. 7 months earlier, Jason had searched online court records involving the Miller Trust. 6 months earlier, my chest tightened. Jason had sent Rachel her very first message on social media. I stared at the dates. "No," Michael nodded. "They're very close together." Patricia looked at me carefully. "I don't think Rachel was a coincidence." Silence settled over the room. I remembered Rachel telling me she'd met Jason at a charity fundraiser. She had described it as fate. Now it looked more like research. Michael continued. 3 months after beginning their relationship, Jason searched public tax assessments for your house. Another search followed. Insurance records, building permits, neighborhood values, everything connected to my property. He wasn't dating Rachel. The words escaped before I realized I was speaking them aloud. He was investigating me. No one argued. Michael clicked another file. This one contained photographs taken from public social media pages. Pictures of Rachel, Emily, even me. Family gatherings, Christmas dinners, birthdays. Some of them had been downloaded months before Jason ever entered my home. A chill ran through my body. He knew what our family looked like. Yes. He knew where I lived. Yes. He knew Rachel was recently divorced. Michael nodded again. He probably knew she was financially vulnerable. I closed my eyes. Every dinner, every smile, every thoughtful gift, every kind conversation. Had any of it been genuine? Arthur quietly answered the question I couldn't bring myself to ask. Predators rarely begin by looking dangerous. Michael opened one final folder. Bankruptcy projections, projected losses, investment deadlines. One figure had been highlighted. Jason needed nearly $2 million within the next 6 months to prevent several business guarantees from collapsing. $2 million. Suddenly, $1,800 from my wedding ring made no sense. I frowned. Why would he care about the ring? Michael leaned forward. Because he probably never wanted the money. Patricia looked at him. What do you mean? He knew the ring belonged to Robert. So, if he discovered Robert designed hidden compartments in furniture, he paused. He may have wondered whether he designed hidden compartments elsewhere. Arthur slowly nodded. He did. We both looked at him. Robert built secret drawers into several custom cabinets. It was one of his favorite woodworking challenges. Michael pointed toward the wedding ring lying inside its velvet box. So Jason may have believed the ring contained information. Not cash, not diamonds, information. Everything suddenly fit together. The photographs, the property searches, the pressure on Rachel, the stolen documents, the missing wedding ring. Jason hadn't been chasing jewelry. He had been chasing Robert's secrets. I felt physically sick. Patricia reached across the table. Linda. I looked at her. We still don't know how much Rachel understands. I wanted to believe she had been manipulated. I desperately wanted to believe that. But another memory surfaced. Rachel insisting on photographing my files. Rachel opening my mail. Rachel asking about Robert's land. Those hadn't all been Jason's hands. Some of them had been hers. Michael closed his laptop. I'll continue digging. But my advice is simple. What? Don't confront Jason yet. Why, he still believes you don't know what he was looking for. Patricia nodded. And that's our advantage. As we left the office, my phone vibrated. A message from Rachel. Mom, Jason wants to come over tonight to apologize. Please don't tell him you've been talking to lawyers. He says we can still fix everything. I read the text twice. Then I looked at Patricia. She didn't have to ask what it said. She already knew from my face. For the first time, I realized Jason wasn't running away. He was coming directly to my house. And he believed he still had a chance to convince me to hand him everything Robert had spent decades protecting. I read Rachel's text message 3 more times before I answered. Instead of replying immediately, I set my phone face down on the kitchen table and looked out the window. The afternoon sun stretched across the backyard, where Robert had once spent entire Saturdays building birdhouses with Emily. Everything outside looked peaceful. Inside me, nothing was. Patricia waited patiently across from me. "What are you thinking?" she asked. I let out a slow breath. "I'm thinking about the first time Rachel ever lied to me." Patricia tilted her head. "When she was 8. I smiled sadly despite myself. "She broke the living room lamp while throwing a tennis ball inside the house. And she cried for an hour before finally admitting what she'd done." I looked down at my hands. Back then, guilt always caught up with her. Patricia remained silent. "I'm not sure it still does." An hour later, I drove home alone. Patricia had offered to come with me, but I wanted one conversation with my daughter before lawyers, investigators, and police became involved. No matter what she had done, Rachel was still my child. When I walked into the house, Emily was upstairs doing homework. Rachel sat alone in the living room. She looked exhausted. The television was on, but the volume had been muted. She stood the moment she saw me. "Mom, we need to talk." She nodded without arguing. I pointed toward the dining room. "Just us." Rachel glanced toward the staircase. "Emily, she doesn't need to hear this." A few moments later, we sat across from one another at the same table where I had celebrated every birthday she ever had. Neither of us spoke first. Finally, I placed several papers between us. The security photo from Arthur's store, the property search records, copies of Jason's company filings. Rachel's eyes widened. "Where did you get these?" "It doesn't matter." "It does." "No. What matters is whether you're finally going to tell me the truth." She looked away. "I already did." "No. You told me pieces. I want all of it." Rachel folded her arms. "You've already decided I'm the villain." "I haven't decided anything." "Really?" Her voice rose. "You went behind my back." "I went looking for answers." "You called lawyers." "Because my daughter stole my wedding ring." Silence. She rubbed her temples. "I didn't steal it." "You took it without permission." "I was going to explain." "When—" She couldn't answer. I pushed another document toward her. "Why were you photographing my property records?" "I told you." "No." "You gave me an excuse." "I want the truth." Rachel stared at the papers for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "Jason thought there might be paperwork you didn't know about." "So he asked you to search my house?" She nodded almost invisibly. I felt something inside me crack. "You actually did it." "I didn't think it would hurt anyone." "You opened my mail." "I know." "You searched my filing cabinet." "I know." "You took photographs of legal documents." "I know." Each admission sounded quieter than the one before. I leaned back in my chair. Rachel, look at me. Slowly, she raised her eyes. They're just papers. No, they're my life. They're your father's work. They're everything we spent 40 years building. Tears filled her eyes. I know that now. No. I shook my head gently. I don't think you do. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Rachel surprised me. You know what always bothered me? I frowned. What? Dad? The answer caught me off guard. She continued before I could interrupt. Everyone thought he was perfect. He wasn't. He forgot birthdays. He worked too much. He missed school plays. She laughed bitterly. But somehow, everyone only remembers the good parts. I stared at her. What does that have to do with this everything? She wiped her eyes. When Dad got sick, you disappeared. The word struck harder than I expected. I spent every day keeping your father alive. I know, but I needed you too. Silence filled the room. Rachel continued speaking. My marriage was falling apart. I know. No. She shook her head. You didn't. I called. You said you couldn't talk because Dad had another appointment. I asked if you could watch Emily. You said the hospice nurse was coming. I cried in the parking lot outside my lawyer's office. You never came. My chest tightened painfully. I remembered those years. Robert's chemotherapy, the hospital visits, the medications, the nights I slept in uncomfortable chairs beside his bed. I had believed I was doing the right thing. Maybe I had, but perhaps I had failed Rachel in ways I never recognized. I was trying to save your father. Rachel nodded. I know. And I couldn't save my marriage. Another long silence followed. I felt invisible. Her voice cracked. After Dad died, everyone asked how you were doing. No one asked about me. I closed my eyes. For the first time that day, I truly listened instead of defending myself. Rachel wasn't excusing what she'd done. She was explaining how she'd become someone capable of doing it. I started believing that nothing I ever did would matter. She looked down at the table. Then Jason came. I remained silent. He listened. He told me I deserved better. He said I'd spent my whole life living in everyone else's shadow. Dad's. Yours. He said I finally deserved something of my own. I asked quietly, and you believed him? Yes. She didn't hesitate. I wanted to. I understood that answer better than I wanted to admit. Sometimes people don't believe lies because they're convincing. They believe them because they desperately need them to be true. But that doesn't explain the ring. Rachel closed her eyes. He thought Dad hid something. I know. He kept asking if your father ever built secret compartments. My heartbeat quickened. What did you tell him? I remembered Dad making hidden drawers in furniture. So Jason assumed there might be something hidden somewhere else. The ring. She nodded. I told him I thought you never took it off. But after Dad died, you only wore it on special occasions. She looked ashamed. He said if there was a secret, that ring would be the perfect place. Everything Michael had suspected was true. Jason hadn't cared about selling jewelry. He wanted whatever Robert had hidden. I looked directly into my daughter's eyes. Rachel, did you know about the land? She shook her head immediately. No, I swear. I thought Jason was chasing investment records. That's all. I believed her, not because I wanted to, because her confusion looked genuine. Then I asked the question I had been avoiding. Who signed my name? Rachel froze. Her breathing became shallow. Who signed it? Tears spilled freely now. I did. The words barely escaped her lips. I felt as though all the air had left the room. You forged my signature, Jason said. I didn't ask what Jason said. She flinched. I asked what you did. I signed it. Why? He said it wasn't a real contract. He said it was only to begin negotiations. He promised nothing would happen without your permission. And you believed him. I wanted to. Again, the same heartbreaking answer. I wanted to. She covered her face with both hands. I know how stupid that sounds. It doesn't sound stupid. It sounds dangerous. She sobbed quietly. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did. I know. I know. For several minutes, the only sound in the room was Rachel crying. Finally, she whispered, Are you going to throw me out? I looked toward the staircase. Emily was still upstairs, listening perhaps, waiting. I thought about everything that had happened. The stolen ring, the forged signature, the lies, the years of buried resentment. Then I made the hardest decision of my life. Rachel, you can't stay here. Her face collapsed. Not because I don't love you, but because I can't protect you from the consequences anymore. She nodded slowly, almost as if part of her had expected those words all along. Before she stood up, she looked at me one last time. Mom, if I tell Jason everything, he'll destroy me. I stared at my daughter. For the first time, I realized she wasn't just afraid of losing me. She was terrified of the man she had chosen to trust. And somehow, I knew our family was running out of time. Rachel's last words stayed with me long after she walked upstairs to pack a small suitcase. If I tell Jason everything, he'll destroy me. For hours, I had been angry. Then suddenly, I felt something else. Fear. Not for myself, for my daughter. I wasn't blind enough to believe Rachel was innocent. She had lied to me, searched through my private papers, stolen my wedding ring, and forged my signature. Those were choices she had made. But fear has a sound, and I had heard it in her voice. Patricia arrived just after sunset. I opened the front door before she had a chance to knock. How is she? She asked quietly. Packing. Patricia nodded. And you? I don't know. She gave me a sympathetic smile. That's probably the most honest answer anyone could give today. Rachel came downstairs carrying one suitcase and a backpack. Emily stood silently behind her. Neither of them spoke. Rachel avoided looking at me. I'll stay with a friend. I nodded. I think that's best. Emily suddenly stepped forward. Mom. Rachel hugged her tightly. I'm sorry. Emily whispered something I couldn't hear. Rachel kissed her forehead before turning toward me. I know saying I'm sorry isn't enough. No, it isn't. She lowered her head. I understand. Then she walked out the front door. I watched her drive away without looking back. The silence she left behind felt heavier than any argument we'd had. Emily stood beside me at the window. Grandma. Yes. Do you think Mom is a bad person? The question broke my heart. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. No. I think your mother has made terrible decisions. Those aren't always the same thing. Emily leaned against me. I don't want to lose her. You won't. But things have to change. The next morning, Patricia picked me up before sunrise. "We're going to the vault." I looked at the tiny brass key resting inside its protective case. The number 317 seemed almost ordinary now, but I knew it represented years of secrets Robert had carried alone. The private document repository was located on the lower level of a historic office building in downtown Columbus. There was no sign outside advertising what it was, only a small brass plaque beside an unmarked door. Inside, security was unlike anything I had ever experienced. We passed through 2 locked doors. I presented my driver's license. My photograph was taken. My fingerprint was scanned. Then a receptionist compared Patricia's authorization documents with the notarized instructions Robert had left. Finally, an older gentleman wearing a gray suit approached us. "Mrs. Miller?" "Yes." "My name is Charles Donovan. I manage this facility." He looked at the brass key in Patricia's hand. "I haven't seen that key in years." "You remember my husband?" Charles smiled. "Very well. He told me one day you might come." Even now, Robert seemed to be waiting for me around every corner. Charles led us down a long hallway lined with steel vault doors. Everything echoed softly. Finally, we stopped before a heavy compartment marked simply 317. Charles unlocked the outer security mechanism. Patricia handed me the brass key. "This part is yours." My fingers trembled as I inserted it. The key turned smoothly. A metallic click echoed through the hallway. Charles pulled open the vault drawer. Inside sat a single cedar box. Nothing else. No stacks of cash. No jewelry. No gold. Just one beautifully crafted wooden box. I recognized the workmanship immediately. Robert had made it. My fingertips traced the grain of the polished walnut lid. He had carved tiny oak leaves around the edges, the same pattern he used on the bowl that still sat in my dining room. I smiled through tears. "He built this?" Arthur nodded. "I knew he would." Charles quietly excused himself, leaving Patricia and me alone in a private viewing room. I carefully lifted the lid. Inside were neatly arranged folders tied with blue ribbon. Several leather-bound journals, a sealed envelope addressed to me, and a small flash drive. Patricia looked surprised. "I didn't know about that." Neither did I. I reached for the envelope first. Robert's handwriting greeted me again. "Linda, if you're opening this box, then Arthur and Patricia kept their promise. Now it's your turn to keep one for me." I swallowed hard. "Please don't be angry that I protected you without asking permission. You once told me marriage meant carrying each other's burdens. I simply carried one a little longer." I smiled despite the tears. That sounded exactly like Robert, always trying to soften difficult truths. I continued reading. The first folder contained the original deed to my father's land. Every page bore official county seal. Everything Patricia had shown me on the microfilm was here in full. The second folder explained the trust Robert had established. It named me as the sole trustee while I remained alive. No child, no relative, no future spouse, no power of attorney. No one could transfer ownership without my physical presence. 3 separate legal safeguards had been built into the trust. Patricia examined the documents carefully. "He thought of everything." I nodded. "He knew I hated conflict. He designed the trust so no one could pressure me." She smiled gently. "Exactly." I opened the next folder. It contained letters Robert had exchanged with surveyors, engineers, and attorneys over nearly 20 years. Every few years, he quietly renewed the trust, paid taxes, updated legal protections, maintained insurance. He never missed a deadline, never overlooked a detail. He had been protecting something I didn't even know I still owned. Then I opened one of the leather journals. The first page stopped me cold. Reasons I never told. Linda. My chest tightened. There were dozens of entries, some only a paragraph long, others stretched across several pages. One entry read, "Linda believes people deserve second chances. That's one of the reasons I fell in love with her. It's also why someone could someday take advantage of her kindness." Another said, "Rachel has a beautiful heart, but she mistakes confidence for character. She believes the loudest voice in the room is usually the strongest. I hope life proves me wrong." I closed my eyes. Robert hadn't been criticizing our daughter. He had been worrying about her. He had been worrying about her. Every word carried love, never contempt. Another page caught my attention. It was dated almost 4 years before Robert died. Rachel had apparently borrowed money from him without telling me. Several $1,000s. Robert had helped her quietly after she guaranteed a loan for a former boyfriend who disappeared without repaying it. He never told me. Not because he wanted secrets, because he wanted to preserve Rachel's dignity. I looked toward Patricia. "Did you know about this?" She nodded reluctantly. "I promised Robert I would never tell you unless it became relevant." "So Jason wasn't the first man to manipulate her?" "No, he was simply the most dangerous." I kept reading. There were notes about every major legal renewal, copies of tax receipts, photographs of boundary markers, even handwritten reminders to himself. One page had been underlined twice. "Never allow Linda to surrender this property because she feels guilty." My vision blurred again. How many times had he written some version of that sentence? How many nights had he lain awake, imagining a future where I would sacrifice everything simply to keep peace inside our family? Near the bottom of the cedar box sat the flash drive. Patricia looked at it. "I think that's last." I nodded. Arthur connected it to a small laptop Charles had provided. A single video file appeared. Date recorded March 14th, 3 months before Robert died. Arthur clicked play. The screen flickered. Then Robert appeared. He looked thinner than I remembered. His face was pale. But his smile hadn't changed at all. "Hello, sweetheart." The sound of his voice stole the air from my lungs. He looked directly into the camera. "If you're watching this, then I'm sorry I wasn't there to protect you myself." I reached for Patricia's hand without realizing it. Robert took a slow breath. "The land isn't the most important thing in this box." I frowned. "What could possibly matter more than $5 million? Robert answered as though he had heard my question. "The most valuable thing I'm leaving you is permission." I stared at the screen. Permission to say no. Permission to disappoint people. Permission to choose yourself without apologizing. Tears streamed freely down my face. "For most of our marriage," Robert continued softly, "I've watched you give away pieces of yourself because you couldn't bear seeing someone else unhappy." He smiled sadly. "Linda, if anyone ever tells you that loving them means surrendering your voice, they're asking for the wrong kind of love." The room was completely silent. Then Robert added one final sentence before the screen faded to black. "And if Rachel is standing beside you when you hear this, tell her I never stopped believing she could choose differently." The video ended. I sat frozen, because for the first time since this nightmare had begun, I understood that Robert hadn't built an elaborate system merely to protect land. He had built it to protect the woman he knew would someday struggle to protect herself. I watched Robert's face disappear from the screen, but his last words stayed with me. Permission to say no. For 42 years, I had believed love meant sacrificing first and asking questions later. Robert had spent the final years of his life trying to teach me something different. Patricia quietly closed the laptop. I think he knew exactly what kind of decision you would eventually face. I nodded slowly. He wasn't protecting the land. He was protecting me. Yes. Arthur rested one hand on the cedar box. Robert understood that property can always be replaced. But once someone learns they can control your decisions, they rarely stop. We carefully repacked every document before leaving the vault. Patricia insisted on placing the original deed trust papers and Robert's journals into a fireproof case she kept at her office. The fewer people who know where these are, she said, the better. I agreed. By the time we drove back to Columbus, the afternoon sun had turned the streets golden. For a few brief moments, I allowed myself to believe the worst might already be behind us. Then my phone rang. Rachel. I hesitated before answering. Hello. Her breathing was uneven. Mom. Jason wants to meet you. I closed my eyes. I thought you moved out. I did. Then why are you calling about him? He says everything has been misunderstood. I almost laughed. Misunderstood. As though stolen rings and forged signatures were simple communication problems. What does he want? He wants to explain. I've heard enough explanations. Please. He says he only wants 15 minutes. I remained silent. Rachel lowered her voice. He already knows you've been talking to lawyers. That made my heart skip. How? I don't know. Rachel, I'm serious. He somehow found out. After we hung up, Patricia looked at me. He knows we're moving. It appears so. She frowned. That means he's watching more closely than we realized. An hour later, I returned home. The driveway was empty. Emily was inside finishing a history assignment at the dining room table. She smiled weakly when she saw me. Hi, Grandma. Hi, sweetheart. Everything okay? I forced a smile. It will be. She looked unconvinced. While Emily finished her homework upstairs, I walked slowly through the house. Every room reminded me of Robert. The framed photographs, the handmade bookshelves, the rocking chair he had restored for my mother. I stopped in the kitchen. There, lying neatly on the center of the table, was a large white envelope. No stamp, no mailing label. Someone had delivered it by hand. My name appeared across the front. Linda Miller. Nothing else. A chill ran through me. I hadn't seen the envelope when I first walked inside. Perhaps I had been too distracted. Perhaps someone had slipped it through the mail slot only minutes earlier. I called Patricia immediately. Don't open it. I'm already holding it. Put it down. I'll be there in 10 minutes. She arrived in less than 8. Together, we examined the envelope. No return address. No fingerprints visible to the naked eye. Patricia carefully opened it using gloves from her briefcase. Inside was a professionally prepared purchase agreement. My name appeared throughout the document. So did the address of my father's land. Purchase price, $2,150,000. I frowned. That's nowhere near its value. It isn't supposed to be. Patricia flipped several pages. The proposed buyer was listed as Midwest Community Development Holdings, LLC. The name meant nothing to me. Until Patricia reached the final page. She smiled without humor. There it is. What? The registered agent. I leaned closer. The signature line identified a law office representing Midwest Community Development Holdings. Patricia recognized it immediately. This attorney has represented Jason Reed's companies for years. So he owns this company. Maybe directly, maybe indirectly, but he's connected. I turned another page. Attached was a colorful brochure. Artist renderings showed luxury condominiums, restaurants, walking paths, a hotel. Everything looked beautiful, almost convincing. Then I noticed a handwritten note clipped to the front. Mrs. Miller, this offer won't last forever. Your family deserves security now, not years from now. Let's talk before someone else makes decisions for you. No signature, no phone number. Just those words. Your family deserves security. The same language Jason always used. Patricia carefully slipped every page back into the envelope. He wants you to think this is your decision. It isn't. No. He wants urgency. So I won't ask questions. Exactly. Before we could discuss it further, headlights swept across the front windows. A black SUV pulled into my driveway. I recognized it instantly. Jason. He stepped out wearing a navy blazer, carrying what looked like an expensive bottle of wine, as though he were arriving for dinner instead of walking into the middle of a family disaster. Emily looked downstairs. Grandma. It's him. I know. Patricia quietly touched my arm. You don't have to do this. I looked through the window. Jason adjusted his jacket, smiled confidently, and walked toward my front porch. No, I said calmly. I think I do. The doorbell rang. Once. Then again. I opened the door only halfway. Jason smiled warmly, exactly as he had the first day we met. Mrs. Miller? Linda? I was hoping we could clear up a few misunderstandings. There aren't any misunderstandings. His smile never faded. I think there are. He lifted the bottle. I brought your favorite Cabernet. I don't want it. He lowered the bottle slightly. I know Rachel made mistakes. She admitted them. But families shouldn't let one bad decision destroy everything. I folded my arms. What exactly are you asking for? Just a conversation. I've already had one. With lawyers. Now I'd like one without them. Patricia stepped into view behind me. Jason's expression changed for only a fraction of a second. Just long enough for me to notice. He hadn't expected her to be there. Ms. Lawson. Mr. Reed. He recovered almost immediately. I didn't realize you were visiting. Patricia smiled politely. I didn't realize you delivered unsolicited real estate contracts. His eyes flickered toward the envelope still lying on my kitchen table. Only for an instant. But I saw it. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at Patricia. He was checking to see whether I had opened the documents. That single glance told me everything. He hadn't come to apologize. I had come to measure how much I knew. Jason looked back at me with the same polished smile. I truly believe we can help each other. I met his eyes. Then for the first time in my life, I heard Robert's voice clearly inside my heart. Permission to say no. So I smiled back. Not because I believed Jason, but because for the first time I intended to let him believe me. And if pretending to listen was the only way to uncover the rest of his plan, then that was exactly what I was going to do. Then, perhaps you should come inside. The invitation surprised everyone. Patricia looked at me for the briefest moment, searching my face for doubt. I gave her an almost invisible nod. Trust me. Jason smiled with obvious relief. I appreciate that, Linda. He stepped into my home as though he belonged there. The sight alone made my stomach tighten. Robert had built this house into a sanctuary for our family. Jason walked through the front hallway like a man evaluating an investment. His eyes drifted over the hardwood floors, the staircase, the fireplace. Even now, he wasn't seeing memories. He was seeing assets. Emily quietly came downstairs. The moment Jason noticed her, his expression softened. Emily, how have you been? She forced a polite smile. I'm okay. I've been worried about you. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked toward me. Grandma, should I go upstairs? Yes, sweetheart. She nodded and disappeared without another word. Jason watched her leave. She's a wonderful kid. She deserves stability. I sat down at the dining table. So tell me, what exactly do you want? Jason placed the bottle of wine on the counter but didn't sit immediately. I want to fix what's been damaged. You mean my relationship with Rachel, our entire family. I almost admired how smoothly he spoke. Every sentence sounded rehearsed, carefully measured. Patricia remained silent in the corner of the room, pretending to review documents in her briefcase. Jason finally sat across from me. I understand why you're upset. I doubt that. No. I do. Rachel made emotional decisions. She's been under tremendous pressure. I folded my hands. What kind of pressure? He hesitated for less than a second. The divorce. Financial insecurity. The responsibility of raising Emily. I watched him carefully. Not once did he mention his own role. So none of this has anything to do with you. He smiled sadly. I've tried to help. Sometimes help gets misunderstood. I remembered Michael Torres's words. Predators rarely begin by looking dangerous. Jason leaned forward. Linda, I genuinely care about Rachel. She deserves happiness, and I know you want that too. I do. Then we already have something in common. I didn't answer. He continued. I've spent my career helping families create financial security. Patricia looked up from her papers, but said nothing. Jason reached into his leather briefcase. I brought something I'd like you to see. He placed a glossy folder on the table. Architectural renderings, luxury homes, restaurants, walking trails, community centers. Every page looked more impressive than the last. The land outside Columbus could become something extraordinary. I looked at him calmly. What land? His smile faltered, only for a heartbeat. Then it returned. The property your father left. I tilted my head. I wasn't aware I owned any property outside Columbus. Another tiny pause, so brief that most people would have missed it. But I saw it. Jason had expected me to admit it immediately. Instead, I had forced him to reveal what he already believed. He recovered quickly. I may have misunderstood. You must have. He laughed softly. My apologies. Patricia finally spoke. Interesting. Jason turned toward her. What is... You apologized for mentioning land that Mrs. Miller supposedly doesn't own. His smile disappeared. I misspoke. Did you... Patricia closed her briefcase. Or did you assume she already knew? Jason's jaw tightened. I think we're drifting away from the real issue. No, Patricia replied calmly. I think we're arriving at it. Jason looked back at me. Linda, I don't want lawyers involved. I've found they usually become necessary when people stop telling the truth. For the first time, irritation flashed across his face. I came here in good faith. So did I. Silence settled over the room. Finally, Jason changed tactics. May I ask you something? You may. When was the last time you had a full medical evaluation? Patricia immediately looked up. So that's where this is going. Jason ignored her. I only ask because Rachel mentioned you've become forgetful. I stared at him. My daughter said that... He nodded sympathetically. She worries about you. You've misplaced documents, forgotten appointments, lost valuable jewelry. Each sentence was carefully delivered, each one designed to sound compassionate. I realized what he was doing. He wasn't accusing me. He was building a narrative, one that could later be repeated in court. I answered quietly. I didn't lose my wedding ring. No. My daughter stole it. Jason sighed. I don't think using words like stole helps anyone. It helps describe reality. He leaned back. I've worked with many older clients. Sometimes grief affects memory. There are support services, Patricia interrupted. Be very careful, Mr. Reed. He looked at her. Excuse me. You're suggesting diminished mental capacity. I'm suggesting compassion. No, she replied evenly. You're laying a foundation. Jason smiled politely. I think you're reading too much into this. Patricia didn't blink. I've practiced elder law for 36 years. I know exactly what I'm hearing. Jason's expression hardened. For just a second, the charming businessman disappeared. Someone colder looked back at us. Then his smile returned. Perhaps we should discuss the property another day. There is no property to discuss. I said it deliberately. He studied my face, trying to determine whether I was lying. Trying to measure how much I knew. At that exact moment, footsteps sounded on the staircase. Emily. She wasn't supposed to come downstairs. She held her phone tightly in one hand. Grandma. I frowned. I thought you were upstairs. I was. She looked directly at Jason. I need to say something. Jason smiled warmly. Of course. Emily ignored the smile. I heard you talking. My heart skipped. Emily. She shook her head. No. I'm tired of pretending. She looked at Jason. Last week you told my mom that if Grandma didn't sign the papers, you'd make sure Mom never saw me again. The room froze. Jason's face drained of color. I never said that. Emily lifted her phone. Yes. You did. I recorded it. Complete silence. Even Patricia looked surprised. Jason stood so abruptly that his chair scraped across the hardwood floor. Emily, you misunderstood. I didn't misunderstand anything. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. I heard you tell Mom that my dad would get full custody if she didn't help you. You said she'd lose everything. You said Grandma was the only obstacle. Jason stared at the phone in her hand. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked genuinely afraid. Emily took one slow step backward toward me. I made a copy. And another. And another. If anything happens to Grandma, people are going to hear every word you said. Jason didn't say another word. He simply picked up his briefcase, looked at each of us one final time, then walked out the front door without saying goodbye. The moment his SUV disappeared down the street, Emily's shoulders collapsed. She burst into tears. I rushed forward and wrapped my arms around her. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I wasn't trying to spy. I was scared. I held her as tightly as I could. You did exactly the right thing. Patricia slowly sat back down. She looked at the phone still clutched in Emily's hand. Then she looked at me. Linda, that recording may have just saved everything. I looked out the window toward the empty driveway. Jason hadn't come to negotiate. He had come to test how vulnerable I still was. Instead, he had walked away, leaving behind the one witness he never imagined would stand against him. Emily cried for nearly 20 minutes before she was finally able to catch her breath. I sat beside her on the living room sofa, gently rubbing circles across her back, just as I had done when she was little and frightened by thunderstorms. I'm sorry, she whispered again. You've apologized enough. I should have told you sooner. I brushed a strand of hair away from her face. You told me when you were ready. I was scared. I know. She looked toward the front window where Jason's SUV had disappeared. I didn't think he'd actually hurt Grandma. I knew he was hurting Mom. Patricia quietly poured Emily a glass of water. When did you make the recording? Emily wiped her eyes. About 3 weeks ago? Patricia's eyebrows lifted. So before the ring was stolen? Emily nodded. I wasn't trying to spy. I promise. I woke up because they were arguing downstairs. She looked at me nervously. I heard my name. So I stayed on the stairs. I reached for her hand. What happened? Emily stared into her glass. Mom was crying. Jason kept saying they were running out of time. He said investors were calling every day. He kept asking if she'd found Grandpa's papers. My heart tightened. And then, Emily swallowed. Mom said she couldn't keep searching your room. She said she felt guilty. I closed my eyes. Rachel had known she was crossing a line. She hadn't been completely blind. Emily continued. Jason got angry. He said guilt doesn't pay debts. He said if she loved me, she'd do whatever was necessary. Patricia leaned forward. Did he mention the land? Emily nodded slowly. He called it the only way out. And your mother? She kept saying she didn't know where the documents were. Emily looked up at me. That's when he started talking about custody. I felt my stomach knot. He said Dad could ask the court to take me. He said Mom's financial problems would make her lose. He said nobody would believe a woman drowning in debt. Emily's voice trembled. And then he said... She hesitated. What? He said. Your grandmother is the only thing standing between us and a new life. The room became painfully quiet. I suddenly understood why Rachel had looked so terrified the previous day. She hadn't simply been afraid of being caught. She had been trapped, not legally, emotionally. Patricia gently took the phone from Emily. May I? Emily nodded. Patricia plugged the phone into her laptop. There are several recordings. Emily looked embarrassed. I started recording after the first argument. Just in case. I stared at my granddaughter. At 16 years old, she had done what none of the adults had managed. She had quietly documented the truth. The first recording began. Rachel's voice filled the room. I'm not stealing from my mother. Jason answered immediately. No, you're protecting your daughter. Another recording. Rachel crying. I can't forge her signature. Jason's voice remained calm. It isn't forgery. It's family authorization. Then another. I don't think the ring has anything inside. Jason replied, We won't know until someone opens it. Every recording painted the same picture. Pressure. Manipulation. Control. Patricia paused the audio. This is powerful. But we still need something stronger. I frowned. Stronger. We need Jason to expose himself. He already has. Not enough. She closed the laptop. A defense attorney will argue these conversations were emotional. We need evidence showing he knowingly planned fraud. I understood. He needs to believe he's winning. Exactly. Patricia reached for her phone. I'm calling Detective Alan Brooks. He works with the Financial Crimes Unit. I've collaborated with him before. Within an hour, Detective Brooks arrived at my house. He was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered, with tired eyes that suggested he'd seen every kind of deception imaginable. After listening to the recordings, he nodded thoughtfully. This isn't just family drama. No. Patricia agreed. It's financial exploitation. The detective turned toward me. Mrs. Miller, I need to ask you something. Anything. Would you be willing to let Jason believe you're ready to sell? I stared at him. You want me to lie? I want you to let him reveal the truth. I looked toward Robert's empty chair. For 42 years, I had avoided conflict whenever possible. Now strangers were asking me to walk directly into it. I don't know if I can. Detective Brooks spoke gently. You don't have to convince him. You only have to let him think he's convinced you. Patricia smiled. And you'll never be alone. The detective outlined the plan. Jason would receive a call. I would tell him I had thought carefully about everything. I would say I wanted to review the sale one final time. The meeting would take place in Patricia's conference room. Everything would be recorded legally. Investigators would remain nearby. If Jason presented forged documents, pressured me, or admitted knowledge of the hidden ownership structure, it would become powerful evidence. I sat silently for several minutes. Finally, I nodded. I'll do it. Patricia immediately began preparing. She gathered copies of the purchase agreement Jason had delivered. She highlighted inconsistencies, incorrect parcel numbers, false property valuations, missing disclosures. Every page contained problems. The more confident he feels, the more likely he'll stop being careful. That evening, after Emily had gone to bed, I stood alone in my bedroom. The restored wedding ring lay inside its velvet box. I picked it up carefully. For the first time since Arthur returned it to me, I slipped it back onto my finger. It fit perfectly. Warm, familiar, comforting. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked older than she had a month earlier. Not because of wrinkles, because of truth. I finally understood something Robert had been trying to teach me. Being kind and being weak were not the same thing. Protecting people did not always mean rescuing them. Sometimes, protecting someone meant refusing to help them continue making destructive choices. The next morning, I called Rachel. She answered immediately. Mom, I'm meeting Jason. Silence, then panic. No, you can't. I have to. Please don't. Rachel, I need you to listen. I'm not meeting him alone. She breathed heavily into the phone. He'll think you're giving in. I know. Another pause. Then she whispered something that made my heart ache. He'll bring the real papers this time. I frowned. What do you mean? He told me. If you finally agreed, everything would end. My pulse quickened. What real papers? Rachel's breathing became uneven. I don't know exactly. But he said he wouldn't make another mistake. Before I could ask another question, she quietly added, Mom, whatever happens tomorrow, don't believe anything he says about me. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. Rachel had just confirmed what Detective Brooks suspected. Jason wasn't finished. He was coming prepared. And whatever documents he planned to bring to Patricia's office, he believed they were enough to take everything Robert had spent decades protecting. I arrived at Patricia Lawson's office 30 minutes early. Not because I wanted more time, because I needed it. The conference room overlooked downtown Columbus through floor-to-ceiling windows. Normally, I loved the view. Robert and I had celebrated more than one legal victory there over the years, closing on our home, updating our wills, settling his parents' estate. Today, the room felt different. Every chair seemed to carry the weight of what was about to happen. Patricia placed a legal pad in front of me. You don't have to remember every detail. I know. Just answer honestly. I nodded. Detective Alan Brooks stepped into the room. He wasn't wearing a uniform. Instead, he looked like another attorney carrying a leather portfolio. 2 additional investigators waited quietly in an adjoining office behind a closed door. They could hear everything. Jason didn't know they were there. Patricia reviewed the plan one last time. "You are not pretending to agree." I looked at her. "I'm not. No. You're pretending to be willing to listen." "There's a difference." I smiled nervously. "I think Robert would appreciate that distinction." She smiled back. "He absolutely would." At exactly 10 o'clock, the receptionist buzzed Patricia's desk. "They're here." They, not just Jason. My heart sank. Rachel had come with him. A moment later, the conference room door opened. Jason entered first, carrying a thick leather briefcase. Rachel followed several steps behind. The moment I saw her, I knew something had changed. She looked exhausted. Her shoulders were slumped. She hadn't bothered with makeup. She kept twisting the silver bracelet around her wrist, a nervous habit she'd had since high school. She didn't look at me. Jason, on the other hand, looked more confident than ever. He smiled warmly. "Linda, thank you for meeting with me." I returned a polite smile. "Please sit." He did. Rachel quietly chose the chair farthest from him. That tiny decision did not escape me. Jason immediately opened his briefcase. "I've prepared updated paperwork. I thought we'd simply talk." "We will. But I believe clear documentation helps everyone." Patricia folded her hands. "Let's see it." Jason slid a stack of documents across the table. Purchase agreement, property disclosure, transfer authorization, corporate valuation. Everything looked professionally prepared, almost too professional. Patricia calmly examined the first page. "So, the buyer is no longer Midwest Community Development Holdings." Jason smiled. "No. We simplified the structure." "And who is the buyer now?" "Riverside Property Acquisition." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "Another limited liability company. It's standard business practice." She nodded thoughtfully, but said nothing. Jason turned toward me. "Linda, I know the last few weeks have been painful. I truly regret that. I never intended for your family to suffer." I watched him carefully. "What did you intend?" He spread his hands. "Opportunity. You deserve financial freedom." "I already have financial freedom." "You have financial potential." "There is a difference." I said nothing. He continued. "This land has been sitting unused for decades. It could change your family's future. It already has." He laughed softly. "I admire your sense of humor." I wasn't joking. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. He recovered quickly. "I understand you're emotionally attached, but emotions shouldn't control financial decisions." Robert's words echoed inside my mind. Permission to say no. Jason opened another folder. "This is an independent valuation." Patricia looked at it, then quietly slid it back. "This appraisal is 14 months old." Jason blinked. "It shouldn't matter." "It matters. The property's value has increased substantially." He shrugged. "Markets fluctuate. Not by several $1,000,000. Silence. He changed subjects immediately. "I've also prepared documentation ensuring Rachel and Emily receive long-term financial security." Rachel finally spoke. "I never asked for that." Jason looked toward her. "It's for your benefit." I said, "I never asked." His smile faded, only slightly, but enough. He returned his attention to me. "Linda, you've always wanted to help your daughter. Here's your chance." I leaned forward. What happens if I refuse? He hesitated. I don't think you will. Answer the question. Another pause. Then he smiled again. I suppose everyone simply continues living as they are. No, I said quietly. I don't think that's true. He studied me. What do you mean? I think you need this property. His fingers stopped moving. I think your business is collapsing. Another silence. Longer this time. I think your investors are demanding money. His expression became unreadable. And I think, without this land, you lose everything. Rachel slowly turned toward him. She had clearly never heard me say those words aloud. Jason let out a quiet laugh. You've been doing research. I've been learning the truth. He leaned back in his chair. Fine. Let's stop pretending. The warmth disappeared from his voice. I know exactly what that land is worth. There it is, Patricia said softly. Jason ignored her. You'll never develop it yourself. You don't have the experience. You don't have the capital. I do, Patricia interrupted. The trust does. His eyes shot toward her. For the first time, real fear appeared. What trust? Patricia didn't answer. Instead, she asked calmly, How did you discover Mrs. Miller still owned the property? Jason smiled again. I won't answer that. No. He folded his arms. I don't need to. I looked directly into his eyes. You searched my family's records before you ever met Rachel. His jaw tightened. I perform research before making investments. You researched me. I researched opportunities. You dated my daughter because of those opportunities. Rachel stared at him, slowly, silently. Jason didn't deny it. Instead, he looked at her. Rachel, you knew why I was interested. She looked horrified. No. I knew you liked real estate. I didn't know. Her voice broke. I didn't know you were looking for my mother. Jason sighed impatiently. This isn't helping anyone. Detective Brooks, listening from the adjoining office, remained silent. He was waiting. Jason reached into his briefcase one last time. I brought something else. He placed a single sheet of paper on the table. It bore what looked like my signature. I felt cold all over. Patricia picked it up. So, this is the forged authorization. Jason frowned. I don't know what you mean. She turned the page around so I could see it. My name, my signature, except it wasn't mine. Rachel covered her mouth. Oh my God. Jason looked at her sharply. Don't. She stared at the paper. I signed that. His eyes widened. She continued before he could stop her. You told me it wasn't legally binding. You said it was only preliminary paperwork. Jason's voice hardened. Rachel, stop talking. She looked at him. For the first time since she'd met him, not with admiration, not with fear, with absolute clarity. You lied to me. He stood up abruptly. I think this meeting is over. Before he could reach the door, it opened. Detective Alan Brooks walked in. 2 investigators followed him. Jason Reed. I'm Detective Brooks with the Financial Crimes Unit. Jason froze. Brooks continued calmly. We've been listening to your conversation. We also have additional evidence concerning attempted fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation. Jason slowly looked around the room. His confident smile was gone. He finally understood. He hadn't walked into a negotiation. He had walked into a trap built entirely from his own lies. Rachel began crying quietly. I looked at my daughter. She looked back at me. "I'll tell them everything," she whispered. Everything. For the first time since this nightmare began, I believed she meant it. No one moved for several seconds after Detective Brooks identified himself. The room seemed frozen in place. Jason stood beside his chair, one hand still resting on his briefcase. His confident posture had disappeared. For the first time since I had met him, he looked like a man who understood he was losing control. Detective Brooks spoke calmly. "Mr. Reed, I'd like you to remain here while we discuss several matters." Jason forced a smile. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Brooks didn't react. "There have been many misunderstandings. Today, we're interested in the facts." Jason slowly sat back down. His attorney wasn't there. His polished speeches weren't working. For the first time, charm wasn't enough. Rachel stared at the table. She hadn't stopped crying. I wanted to comfort her. Every instinct I had as her mother told me to reach across the table and hold her hand. Instead, I stayed where I was. Robert's words echoed inside my heart. Permission to say no. Sometimes, love required restraint. Detective Brooks opened a folder. "Mr. Reed, do you recognize this company?" He slid a document across the table. "Riverside Property Acquisition, LLC." Jason glanced at it. "I've done consulting work for them." Brooks nodded. "We obtained their corporate filings this morning." He placed another document beside it. "The beneficial owner is Reed Holdings." Another page. "The sole managing member of Reed Holdings is—" He looked directly at Jason. "You." Jason remained silent. Brooks continued. "So, despite repeatedly referring to an independent buyer, you intended to purchase Mrs. Miller's property yourself." Jason finally spoke. "That's not illegal." "No," Brooks agreed. "But lying about it while using forged documents is a different matter." Jason looked toward Rachel. "You told them everything." Rachel slowly shook her head. "I didn't have to." "They already knew." His expression hardened. "You ruined everything." Rachel closed her eyes. "No." "You did." The room fell silent again. Brooks turned another page. "We also recovered several emails from investors." He looked at Jason. "You informed them that acquisition of the Miller property was already virtually guaranteed." Jason looked away. "You projected development profits based on land you did not own." Still no answer. Brooks calmly added, "You also represented that legal authorization had already been secured." He placed the forged signature in front of Jason. "This authorization—" Jason stared at the paper. For several long moments, he said nothing. Then he looked at Rachel. "You signed it." Rachel nodded. "I did." He immediately pointed toward her. "There." She admitted it. I never touched the document. I watched him carefully. Even now, even with everything collapsing around him, his first instinct was to blame someone else. Rachel looked at him with disbelief. "You told me it wasn't real." "I told you what you needed to hear." Her face crumpled. "So all those promises, they weren't real either." Jason didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence answered for him. Detective Brooks stood. "Mr. Reed, at this point, you're being detained while our investigation continues." Jason slowly rose. He looked directly at me. "You think you've won?" I met his eyes. "This was never about winning. You destroyed your own life." His expression turned cold. I'll have lawyers. I'm sure you will. You'll spend years in court, Patricia calmly replied, perhaps. But Mrs. Miller won't be facing those years alone. Jason laughed bitterly. You people think justice changes anything. No, I answered quietly. It changes choices. He stared at me for a moment longer, before allowing the investigators to escort him from the room. The conference room door closed behind them. The silence afterward felt almost unreal. Rachel remained seated. She looked smaller somehow, as though the confidence Jason had borrowed her had disappeared with him. She whispered without lifting her head, I'm sorry. No one answered. A minute passed, then another. Finally, she looked at me. I know those words don't fix anything. No, they don't. I know. She wiped her eyes. I kept telling myself I was doing it for Emily. But I wasn't. Her voice trembled. I was doing it because I wanted someone to tell me I hadn't failed. The honesty in those words hurt more than any excuse could have. She continued. I wanted Jason to be right. I wanted there to be some big future waiting for us. I wanted to believe one decision could erase every mistake I'd ever made. She looked directly at me. But every decision only created another lie. I felt tears filling my own eyes. I should have come to you. Yes. I should have admitted I was drowning. Yes. I should have trusted you instead of him. Another painful silence. Then Rachel whispered, Do you hate me? My heart broke all over again. I answered honestly, No, I've never hated you. I've been angry. I've been disappointed. I've been heartbroken. But I have never stopped loving you. She burst into tears again. I don't deserve that. Love isn't something you earn, I said quietly. But trust is. She nodded. I know. Patricia gently closed the file in front of her. The prosecutor will likely consider your cooperation. Rachel looked frightened. Am I going to prison? Patricia chose her words carefully. I don't know. You committed crimes, but you also became an important witness. The final decision won't be mine. Rachel lowered her head. I'll accept whatever happens. For the first time, I believed her. Several weeks passed before the first court hearing. Jason was formally charged with multiple offenses, including attempted fraud, conspiracy, forgery-related offenses, and financial exploitation targeting an older adult. The investigation uncovered more than anyone expected. He had approached other vulnerable families. He had manipulated struggling people into signing documents they barely understood. Some lost savings. Others lost property. My family hadn't been his first target. We had simply become the one that finally stopped him. Rachel met repeatedly with investigators. She turned over every text message, every email, every financial record. She answered every question without asking for favors. One afternoon, after another interview, she came to Patricia's office where I was reviewing trust documents. She looked exhausted. I found something. She handed me an old envelope. Inside was a cashier's check, uncashed, for $1,800, Arthur's payment. I never touched it, she said quietly. Jason took the receipt. But Arthur called later and told me the sale couldn't be completed. I never went back. I looked at the untouched check. Such a small amount of money. Such enormous consequences. Rachel sat across from me. Mom, I need you to know something. I waited. I always thought you and Dad loved stability more than you loved me. The words caught me by surprise. She continued. When Jason told me you were hiding money, it made sense to me. I thought, maybe you'd always planned to choose your future over mine. My chest tightened. I reached into my purse and removed one of Robert's journals. I opened to a bookmarked page. Then I quietly slid it across the table. Rachel began reading. It was one of Robert's private entries. If the trust performs as expected one day, the income from the property should help Rachel and Emily live without fear. I don't want Rachel to inherit wealth. I want her to inherit security. Rachel's hands began shaking. She kept reading. Linda doesn't know this yet. I'd like to surprise both of them someday. By the time she reached the bottom of the page, tears were falling freely. You are going to help us. I nodded. We always planned to. Her shoulders collapsed. I destroyed the future you were trying to protect. I gently closed the journal. No, I said softly. You delayed it. She looked confused. I met her eyes. The future is still there. But this time, it has to be built with honesty, not shortcuts, not lies, not stolen rings. Honesty. Rachel covered her face and cried harder than I had ever seen. And although I couldn't erase what had happened, for the first time since Robert died, I felt the smallest spark of hope that my daughter might finally become the woman he had always believed she could be. The first time I returned to Klein Family Jewelers after Jason's arrest, I wasn't there to solve a mystery. I was there to bring one chapter of my life to a peaceful close. Arthur greeted me with the same gentle smile he had worn every time Robert and I walked through his doors over the past 4 decades. I've been expecting you, I smiled. I suppose Robert arranged that too. Arthur chuckled softly. In a way, yes. The shop was quiet. Sunlight streamed through the front windows, making the display cases sparkle. It felt nothing like the tense afternoon when I had rushed inside, believing my wedding ring had already been melted down. Instead, it felt peaceful. Healing often arrives quietly. Arthur disappeared into the workshop and returned carrying a small walnut box. I recognized it immediately. Robert had made it. I thought this belonged in something he built. Arthur placed the box gently in front of me. Inside, resting on dark blue velvet, lay my wedding ring. It looked more beautiful than I remembered. The gold had been polished until it glowed warmly beneath the lights. The diamond reflected tiny flashes of color each time I moved. Most importantly, the hidden compartment had been restored so perfectly that no one could ever guess it existed. Arthur carefully picked up the ring. I repaired the tiny hinge. I strengthened the locking mechanism. And he smiled. I completed Robert's final instruction. I looked at him. What do you mean? Arthur reached for a magnifying loupe. Take a look inside. I slipped the loupe over my eye and slowly turned the ring. Near the inner edge of the hidden compartment, almost impossible to see without magnification, was a new engraving. Love protects. Truth preserves. My vision blurred. I lowered the loupe. He planned this. Arthur nodded. The day we built the compartment. He told me, Arthur's voice softened, that if the secret inside the ring ever had to be used, then one more message would be necessary. I traced the tiny words with my fingertip. Love protects. Truth preserves. Robert understood something I had spent decades learning. Love alone cannot hold a family together. Without truth, love eventually becomes fear. Without boundaries, love becomes permission. Without honesty, love becomes silence. Arthur handed me the ring. This belongs home. With trembling fingers, I slipped it back onto my left hand. It fit exactly as it always had. For a brief moment, I closed my eyes. I could almost feel Robert taking my hand again. Not to rescue me, to remind me I was stronger than I believed. Arthur quietly poured 2 cups of coffee. We sat together in the workshop. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, he smiled. "Robert would be proud of you." I laughed softly. "I cried through most of this." "So did he." I looked up. Arthur nodded. "The last time he visited?" "He cried." I stared at him. "Robert?" I was terrified. "Not of dying." Arthur looked directly into my eyes. "He was afraid you'd spend the rest of your life apologizing for protecting yourself." Fresh tears filled my eyes. "That sounds like him." Arthur smiled. "He knew you better than anyone." The months that followed were quieter than I expected. Jason remained in custody while the legal process continued. Rachel accepted responsibility for her part in everything that had happened. She never asked me to make excuses for her. She never asked me to lie. Instead, she began rebuilding her life one ordinary day at a time. She found a full-time administrative position at a medical clinic across town. The salary wasn't remarkable, but it was honest. She attended counseling every week. She completed financial responsibility classes recommended by the court. She also performed community service with an organization that helped older adults understand financial scams. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. One Saturday morning, she called. "Mom, can we have coffee?" I hesitated. Not because I wanted to punish her, because I wanted to protect the progress both of us had made. "We can." We met at a small cafe halfway between our homes. Public, neutral, safe. Rachel arrived early. She looked different, not physically, emotionally. There was no desperate energy in her anymore, no frantic need to convince me of anything. She simply sat quietly until I arrived. When the waitress left, Rachel slid an envelope across the table. "What's this?" "I've been putting money aside." I opened it. Inside was a cashier's check. It wasn't a large amount, but every dollar represented hours she had worked. "What is it for?" "The costs." "What costs?" "The appraisal, the legal copies, the restoration Arthur did on the ring." I looked at her. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do. I can't undo what I did. But I can stop pretending it didn't cost anyone." I folded the check and placed it back into the envelope. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Rachel quietly asked, "Will you ever trust me again?" The question deserved an honest answer. "I don't know." She nodded. "I expected that. But I hope, one day, my actions answer that question better than my words." For the first time in months, I smiled. That's exactly where trust begins. Several weeks later, Patricia invited me to lunch. She spread development proposals across her conference table. Companies from across Ohio wanted to purchase my father's land. The offers were astonishing. Some exceeded $6 million. One developer even offered more if I agreed to immediate construction. Patricia looked at me. "You've earned the right to choose." I studied the maps: restaurants, hotels, shopping centers, luxury apartments. Every proposal promised enormous profits. None of them felt right. I looked out the window and remembered Robert's journals, his love of books, his belief that education changed lives, his quiet habit of helping neighbors without expecting recognition. "I don't want to sell all of it," Patricia smiled. "I had a feeling." I want part of the land to remain ours. What do you have in mind? I smiled. A place Robert would have loved. We spent the next several hours discussing possibilities. A literacy center, financial education programs, legal workshops for older adults, scholarships, community gardens, small reading rooms. The more we talked, the clearer my decision became. The property had protected my family for decades. Now, it could protect other families too. That evening, I drove home beneath a sky glowing orange with sunset. Emily met me at the front door, carrying one of Robert's old birdhouses. I fixed it. I looked closely. She had repaired a broken roof and repainted the tiny wooden perch. It looks beautiful. She smiled proudly. I thought Grandpa would like that. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. I think he would.
As we placed the birdhouse back beneath the old maple tree, I looked down at the wedding ring resting on my hand. It no longer reminded me only of what I had lost. It reminded me of everything Robert had helped me find. My voice, my boundaries,
my courage. And for the first time in a very long while, the future no longer frightened me. 1 year later, I stood beneath a bright autumn sky on the same land my father had once walked as a young man. The fields looked different now, not because they had been covered with buildings, because they had finally been given a purpose. After months of planning legal work and careful negotiations, I had made a decision that surprised almost everyone. I did not sell the entire property. Instead, I leased one section to a respected local developer under strict conditions that protected the land, the environment, and the surrounding community. The long-term lease provided more than enough income for me to live comfortably without ever surrendering ownership. The remaining acreage became something far more meaningful. A dream Robert never had the chance to see. A modest brick building stood near the entrance beneath a wooden sign carved by one of Robert's former apprentices. The Miller Family Learning Center. Below the name in smaller letters was a sentence taken directly from one of Robert's journals. Knowledge protects what kindness alone cannot. Every time I read those words, I smiled. Inside the building were bright classrooms, a community library meeting rooms, and a legal resource office where older adults could receive free guidance about wills, trusts, financial scams, and property protection. Another room offered financial literacy classes for families struggling with debt. Emily had suggested adding computer classes for senior citizens after watching so many older neighbors become targets of online scams. It quickly became one of our most popular programs. The center wasn't luxurious. It wasn't meant to be. It was practical, welcoming, safe. Exactly the kind of place Robert would have built with his own hands if he'd had the chance. On the morning of the grand opening, volunteers moved quietly between tables, arranging flowers, books, and refreshments. Arthur Klein stood near the entrance, adjusting a framed photograph of Robert. He stepped back, studied it for a moment, then smiled. Perfect. I walked over. You've already rearranged that picture 3 times. He laughed. I know. I keep thinking Robert would tell me it's crooked. He probably would. We both laughed. Patricia arrived carrying several folders. Old habits. She smiled. I never attend an event without paperwork. Even after everything was finished, she still carried copies of the trust documents wherever she went. She said it made her feel better. Truthfully, it made me feel better too. Guests began arriving shortly before noon. Teachers, neighbors, former co-workers, families from nearby communities. Some had heard about the center through local newspapers. Others simply wanted to honor Robert's memory. I greeted each person personally, not because I had to, because I wanted to. Then I saw Rachel. She didn't arrive with dramatic apologies or expensive gifts. She parked quietly at the far end of the lot. She walked toward the building alone. For a moment, she simply stood there, looking at the sign. I watched her wipe away a tear before she noticed me. "Hi, Mom." "Hi." She smiled nervously. "You look beautiful." "So do you." She laughed softly. "I don't think anyone's ever called me beautiful wearing a business suit." I looked at her carefully. She looked healthier, not richer, not more successful, simply healthier. There was peace in her face that I hadn't seen in years. "How's work?" I asked. She smiled. "I got promoted last month." "Congratulations." "Thank you." She hesitated. "I also finished paying off my credit card debt." "I'm proud of you." Her eyes immediately filled with tears. "You know, a year ago, I would have expected you to solve that for me. I know. I kept waiting for someone else to rescue me." She looked down at her hands. "I finally realized nobody could." Before I could answer, Emily ran across the lawn. "Mom!" Rachel turned just in time to catch her daughter in a hug. The embrace lasted a long time. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Some conversations happen without words. During the opening ceremony, Patricia spoke first. She described Robert's careful planning, his commitment to protecting family without controlling them, his belief that legal preparation was another form of love. Arthur spoke next. He told stories about Robert spending hours perfecting tiny woodworking details no customer would ever notice. He believed character, Arthur said, was revealed by the parts nobody else could see. I smiled. That sounded exactly like Robert. Finally, it was my turn. I stepped to the podium wearing the restored wedding ring on my left hand, the same ring that had nearly been lost forever. I looked out across the crowd. Neighbors, friends, volunteers, children, older couples holding hands, Emily standing proudly beside Rachel. For a moment, emotion stole my voice. Then I began. A year ago, I believed my family was falling apart. I thought betrayal had erased everything my husband and I spent decades building. I looked down at the ring. I was wrong. The hardest seasons of life don't erase love. They reveal what kind of love survives. The audience remained completely silent. My husband left me more than land. He left me permission. Permission to protect myself. Permission to tell the truth. Permission to say no without apologizing. I glanced toward Rachel. She was crying openly now. Our family is not perfect. It never was. We've made painful mistakes. We've hurt one another. But healing doesn't begin when we pretend nothing happened. It begins when someone finally tells the truth. Applause filled the room. Not loud, not overwhelming, just warm, honest. After the ceremony ended, people slowly explored the building. Emily excitedly demonstrated the new computer lab. Arthur proudly showed visitors the handcrafted reading benches he had donated. Patricia answered questions about estate planning for nearly an hour. Rachel quietly helped clean tables after lunch without anyone asking. She never tried to stand beside me for photographs. She never asked people to notice her. She simply worked. As the afternoon came to an end, we stood together outside watching the sunset spread across the fields. Rachel broke the silence. "I've been thinking about Dad." "So have I." She looked toward the building. "I finally understand something." "What?" "He never hid those things because he didn't trust me." I waited. "He hid them because he loved you. And because he hoped one day someone worthy of sharing them with." I felt tears in my eyes. He never stopped believing that day could come. Rachel looked at me. "Do you I studied my daughter carefully. 1 year earlier, I would have answered with hope alone. Now I had something stronger. Evidence. She had worked every day to rebuild what she had broken. She had accepted consequences. She had stopped making excuses. She had chosen honesty over comfort. Trust wasn't fully restored, but it was growing. Quietly, patiently, like everything else worth keeping. I reached for her hand, not because the past had disappeared, but because the future finally deserved a chance. She squeezed my hand gently. Neither of us said another word. We simply stood together, watching the evening light settle across the land that had nearly torn our family apart. Instead, it had become the place where we finally learned how to rebuild one. Life lesson. If there's one lesson my story taught me, it's this. Love is one of the greatest gifts we can give another person. But love without wisdom can become a doorway to pain. For years, I believed being a good mother meant saying yes, protecting my daughter from every consequence, and sacrificing my own needs to keep peace in the family. I confused kindness with surrender and compassion with silence. Looking back, I realized those choices didn't strengthen our relationship. They allowed unhealthy patterns to grow. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is tell the truth, even when it hurts. Forgiveness is powerful, but forgiveness does not erase accountability. Rachel could not begin until she accepted responsibility for her choices. And I could not begin healing until I stopped carrying guilt that didn't belong to me. Setting boundaries is not selfish. Protecting yourself is not a betrayal. Saying no to manipulation is not the same as saying no to love. My husband understood something I had to learn the hard way. Real love never asks you to surrender your dignity, your voice, or your right to make your own decisions. If you've ever been made to feel guilty for protecting yourself, I hope you'll remember this. You can love someone deeply and still refuse to let them harm you. Sometimes that's exactly what gives both of you the chance to change. Thank you for spending this time with me and listening to my story. Now I'd truly love to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in my place? Could you forgive Rachel after everything she did, or would the betrayal be too much to overcome? Please share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I always enjoy reading your messages. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join me for more emotional